I remember an acquaintance showing me an old Games Workshop catalog. It must have been like 2005. It had a bunch of Crimson Fists in it, but in the back half of the book, it had these guys, Tomb Kings. They were absolutely the coolest thing I'd ever seen. But then I learned how tiny they actually were and that you had to paint them yourself, and I was a kid, I just kind of lost interest. I still looked at the catalog every once in a while though. Then in 2020, during lockdown, I actually got into the hobby. By then, Warhammer Fantasy had come and gone, and I couldn't get any Tomb Kings. Now, Warhammer Fantasy is back, and I want in. Here is my journey to the old world. Yeah, so you might have guessed from the thumbnail that I'm not actually embarking on this journey with the Tomb Kings. Apologies to all of the skeletons who watch this channel. What I do want to do is keep pushing in the direction that I've been exploring this past while. Book of Travels, Seaside, Sunshine, and bizarre conversions. So here's the plan. I want to make a Tzeentch force. We can't have anything nice, so instead of a Lord of Change at the helm, I'm throwing a Chaos Sorcerer on Dragon as the leader. I barely know the game, but I know I want more characters as options. A Demon Prince, a Sorcerer on Chariot, a Champion on Foot, and a Mounted Sorcerer. Feels like a good start. Please yell at me in the comments about the characters I should be taking. Then for the force proper, I'm gonna have 10 Marauder Cavalry, a block of Martyrs on foot, maybe some Ogres and an extra Chariot, some Knights, and what's really of interest for us today, which is a brick of 20 Chaos Warriors. I guess the one thing that appeals to me most with this project is the look of a completed unit. I can't quite articulate what this feeling is. It's not quite nostalgia because I've never played fantasy, but I don't know, yeah, there's this same attachment to like shitty VHS tape in my mind. Anyway, all of this to say that I got this box off of eBay, and it's the subject of today's video. "20 of these old Hunchback Chaos Warriors from 5th edition. Yeah, they're mostly just covered in dust, otherwise they're in pretty good shape. And yeah, I guess it's time to give them a new life. The champion of this squad of boys is gonna be this little beauty, Akold Hellbrass. He's gonna be the key to tying these old guys with the more modern conversions I'm gonna do later. Let me explain real quick. In the lore, Akold was blessed by Tzeentch with the gift of life, meaning wherever he walks, flowers sprout and old doors start growing wood again, and I just cannot be bothered to care about the Warhammer story, like, in any way. But I don't know, this bit I find kind of fun and kind of a whimsical little story. So yeah, as much as it pains me to say, we are gonna run with the actual official story here. The squad Akold is gonna lead is gonna be a horde of little overgrown statues, animated by the ivy and little critters that Akold has brought along. So basically, if they look a little funky compared to newer plastic kits, well, I can just hand wave it away by saying, well, it's just a horde of old statues. You'll forgive me, I'm only gonna do a couple of these guys on camera, otherwise we'd be here all week. This is our basic Chaos Warrior man. I didn't bother to strip him, the primer was very light. Step 1 is to have some vines crawling over him and outside of the armor joints. The head, I'm gonna start with the inside parts, then surround that with petals. Once all of this is set, I sculpt some simple ivy leaves in a couple of spots. Some models will get more covered than this, but it's a decent baseline. You'll notice I don't really care about using the right loadouts on these guys. Part of that is having no clue what I'm doing in the game system, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't just kind of like going against what the game asks of you as a modeler. I think by having my formative years as a gamer marked by super hitting my laptop with so many Minecraft mods that the base game was barely recognizable, I just kind of broke my brain in some way that makes it so I can't just play games normally anymore. I don't know, man, like, these games are meant to be messed with. If you want WYSIWYG, play like Total War or something. This one guy is our Bannerman. He'll be carrying a Draco, a kind of ancient standard using a metal ornament head behind which flows a cloth body. I start with a simple armature, basically just like a cone with the wire coming out of it. Once I have the general shape, I look at historical ref and contemporary interpretations to build the thing right. It seems like it's got some banding around the cloth body, constraining it in some way, which we are going to copy and use as an excuse to practice sculpting cloth. The head part was really just a simple sculpt of a fish face. The music guy in this squad is gonna be a little wind chime dude. I imagine it's probably not that easy for a statue to actually play instruments, so I'm gonna give him two big plants growing from the armholes on the side that are gonna be what holds the little chimes. Using my hobby knife and files, I clean up any fingerprints left by my little grubby hands on the body. The plants got a bit of extra work, mostly roots creeping on the armor and a few leaves. For the chimes, I'm gonna do two super simple designs. The first one is made with a disc of putty with a piece of wire sticking out. Once cured, I glue some plastic hard rods of different sizes at an angle underneath it to simulate the action of the wind. The second one starts with a little ball of putty on a wire. I kind of squish the bottom half to create a sort of round bell shape. After the ball is cured, I add a tiny lip of putty around the bottom of the bell and stick a strip of putty to the wire sticking out below. This is a concept that's been endlessly fascinating to me since I first came across it. The idea of paying way less money for a squad while also getting to do a little diorama to stick in the middle of it is just perfect. I have two planned here, one on the 60 by 60, which is going to count as 4 warriors, and one on the 30 by 60, which is, well, going to count as 2 warriors. The smaller one of the two is going to make use of this wonderful little kit. He's a little resin guy that I got from Fenroll, a French miniature maker that I encourage you to go check out because they have a really cool catalog of civilians and kind of artisans and stuff like that. He's going to be the one carving out our horde of animated sculptures. This is a very simple piece. Both figures are standing on a base with rock shavings and tools scattered around. The Chaos Warrior is chopped in half and incorporated into a block of putty. I did a fair bit of sanding and whittling to get every size kind of smoothed out, then worked on the transition plane, using my tools to leave marks on the surface, letting the viewer know that he's being chiseled out. I really like this guy for some reason. He's like a tiny homage to hand-sculpted minis. The second unit filler is a big wire tree that has taken over one of the statues. I took a truckload of garden wire and just started twisting. Once I was happy and I had everything locked in place, I covered the tree with PVA and a couple of layers of thick acrylic putty. With some putty I added extra details and the lips that would be forming around the piece of armor being swallowed. This is a movement tray. You can see at the bottom I glued a magnetized rubber sheet. This is a 30mm base. And that is the result of me spending about 4 hours the other day magnetizing a whole horde of bases. The pole isn't really strong enough that it would support a whole squad of warriors being held upside down, but it's good enough for me to take them out to the local game store every once in a while. The scheme here is sort of a Mediterranean countryside village. This is just a mix of stuff that you've seen me do before. Go check out this video if you want to learn the process. Most of the new stuff will come later in this video. I did a couple of different schemes on the statues here, using oil paints for change, and also to speed up because there are a lot of dudes to paint. This is the scheme for the basic stone guy, who is going to be the meat of the warrior block. Over a light grey primer, I base coat my warrior and the pavement stones with ochre yellow. After 20 or so minutes, I come back with a sponge or a Q-tip and rub off the layer. This leaves us with something looking like this. That first layer is important because we are going to want to blend the next layer into it, making for a very easy first pass of gradients and stuff. Speaking of, I come in with zinc titanium white and do something like a dry brush over a guy here. With a small clean brush, I blend both of the layers where I want my transitions from light to shadow. For the base and any vegetation on the warriors, I base coat with chromium green deep and then wipe it off like in the first step. I mix my green with ochre yellow and a bit of white and do a very patchy coat over the base. Then with a big dry brush, I very gently stipple white in a few spots around the base. I highlight the plants with that same mix of greens, yellow and white. Now we leave the model to dry for a day or two. Once that first layer of oils is set, I do a quick wash of burnt umber in the shadows and in the spots that need a little extra definition. With the bulk of the oils done and dried, I coat the model with a nice matte varnish. Now it's time for the weathering. First up are the tufts, pretty straightforward. Since it's Zinch and I want blue in the army, I'm gonna select some flower tufts that have blue in the mix. Up next is flocking. I mix some PVA, crushed green pastels and pigments, and this bit of fine flock. I then apply this mixture in large patches on the base and in select spots on the mini. I'm gonna reuse the cotton technique from my first video, putting some hanging cotton soaked with PVA on the model. Once that's dry, I wash it with a warm green oil paint that I had lying around. With the oils out, I prepare a very dark wash and use it to shade our tufts and create some streaks of algae and grime under the plants. You can definitely just use enamels for this, I was just using what I had lying around. I'm also going to use these tan pastel to apply to the bottom bits of the armor and the pavement, indicating, the wear and dust of the statue. Alright, speed round. This one is the quickest scheme by far. I base coat my dude chromium green deep, wait for a couple of days, varnish, wash with a very light turquoise. I'm using Ghostbuster green from GW here. Once it's dry, I dry brush with a bronze color. Here is Warped Bronze. Easy peasy, it's done. For the weathering, I'm gonna go a fair bit lighter than the previous scheme, since green on green isn't as interesting looking. Right, this one starts with a layer of violet red that gets wiped off. Over that I blend in my zinc titanium white and leave it to sit for an hour or two. After that I heavily thin down my violet red and take a fine brush. I go in and trace some lines over the figure, kind of copying the look of pink marble veins. Once I have enough lines for my taste, I take my small blending brush and clean up any line that are too fat and too imprecise for my liking. After that, I finish the details with acrylics and apply the same weathering as I did with my first scheme. Well, for a change, this one starts with Vallejo Metal Color Steel over the entire dude. I then slop some typhus corrosion on the Mini with really no care for where it lands. With this very quick preparatory step, we can now switch to oils. With kind of a gradient mix of ochre yellow, violet red and burnt umber, I make a variety of orange and brown washes. I apply them from roughly darkest to lightest over the metallics. The lighter I go, the more focused on areas that would collect rust I stay. After the oils are set, I varnish, do a light dry brush of my original steel color on the upper bits of the armor, and move on to the weathering, which you've now seen a couple times. I don't really have a recipe for this guy, I'm mostly just freestyling. My palette is mostly staying the same. I just added two colors, one being French Ultramarine and the other being Payne's Grey. Like you've seen in this video and a bit of the basing one I did a while back, I've been dipping my toes into oil paints. It's an interesting journey, really. It feels very different than the classic acrylics I assume all of us are used to. But you know, living in a hot and dry part of the world, they make painting much less stressful, and make stuff like wet blending that I'm doing here much more accessible. I'm still no pro with them, but I like what I've been able to do so far. If you've been watching my channel for a bit, you know I like to try stuff that's new to me in these videos. It's not the most efficient thing for productivity, but learning as I go makes things just much more exciting for me. This oil thing also feels like it's kind of forcing me to get better at painting. You know, it's got real pigment names and the mixing is much easier and becomes kind of required. The drying times are much lower. It makes much more sense to take a little time to think about where I'm going as I paint. It's a good learning rhythm, I feel. I can put the MIDI down for an hour, read a little article, watch a video, look at a painting, and come back and the paints are still malleable. Good learning vibes, you know? And there they are, 20 Chaos Warriors ready for battle. Well, okay, they're not really ready for battle. There's about like 1 million more minis that are needed to make this a playable force. But in the meantime, they are gonna look sick on my shelf, right? It was honestly a lot of fun working with these old, less detailed models. They still have a ton of character to them, and it's very easy to kind of turn them into whatever theme you like. For some reason, they're not like the most popular Chaos Warriors. They're kind of stuck between the older metal ones and the late fantasy kind of ranking up perfectly warriors, which means they're actually kind of cheap. So I would recommend you to pick up a box of these on eBay or wherever you usually get your used models, because yeah, they are like really good conversion fodder. Some of the music in this episode was made by my friend Goobinsgitz, who also makes very nice goblin miniatures. Go check them out in the links in the description. Also, you might have seen at the beginning of this episode a little animated intro kind of title card thing. That took forever to make, which is kind of my excuse as to why it took me until now to get a video out in the new year. I think it's kind of my way of signifying that we've moved on to like season 2 of this channel or something. I've started work on like at least 3 other videos by the time you see this. Some stuff about indie games, a little Warhammer. Well, you know, you'll see what's up in the coming months. This is the part of the video where I write a trite little joke about asking y'all to do the YouTube things. Well, my alarm tone betrays that I am, in fact, actually desperate for any kind of interaction with another human being. Anyway, I'll see you in the next video where I review the Shen Yun show.